The termination email arrived while I was still in the hospital chair, my newborn daughter asleep on my chest, 3 days after giving birth. Effective immediately, it read, "Your position has been eliminated due to restructuring." I read it twice before I understood what my boss, Gregory Hastings, was actually saying. He hadn't restructured anything. He'd fired me for taking maternity leave, and he'd done it 11 weeks before I was even supposed to come back. 18 months later, I walked back into that same building, past the same front desk, and told the receptionist I was there for the board meeting. "I'm sorry," she said. "Who should I say is here?" "Tell them the new majority shareholder is ready," I said. Gregory had no idea yet that the woman he fired while she held her newborn now owned the company he'd built his entire career inside. Welcome to Revenge Stories Narrated, where family betrayal meets inevitable justice and karma always collects its debt. My name is Olivia Sinclair. I'm 34. I spent 6 years as Vice President of Operations at Halstead Marketing Group, a mid-sized agency Gregory Hastings ran with the kind of confidence that made everyone assume he could never be touched. I helped grow that company from 12 employees to 94, negotiated 3 of our biggest client contracts myself, and never once took more than a long weekend off, not until my daughter, Mia, was born. I didn't know, sitting in that hospital chair reading the termination email, that Gregory had already been planning to push me out for months, ever since I told him I was pregnant and watched something shift behind his eyes that I chose, at the time, not to name. I remember the exact day it started, 3 weeks after I told him, sitting across from him at our usual Monday check-in, watching him congratulate me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes before asking, almost too casually, how long I planned to be out of commission. It started small enough that I almost missed it. 2 weeks after I told him about the pregnancy, Gregory quietly moved my biggest client account to a colleague, just to keep continuity, he said, in case anything comes up. 1 month later, he stopped inviting me to the leadership strategy meetings I'd sat in on for 5 straight years, telling me he didn't want to overload me during a stressful time. I lost real ground during those months without fully understanding the pattern. I missed being part of decisions that shaped the company's direction for the next 2 years. I watched a colleague with less experience get promoted into a role I'd been quietly preparing for since the previous winter. I told myself it was temporary, that things would go back to normal once I returned from leave. I also started missing the small social moments that used to keep me connected to the team, since Gregory quietly stopped looping me into after-work dinners with clients, telling me once, almost kindly, that he figured I'd want to save my energy for home. They didn't. Gregory used a narrow gap in our state's labor protections, one that existed briefly before updated 2026 regulations closed it, to classify my role as eliminated rather than simply held for me, timing the paperwork just before the new rules took effect that would have made his move illegal. He said the role was redundant. I told my husband that night, Mia asleep in my arms. 6 years, Daniel. He called 6 years redundant. If you've ever been punished for the exact thing that was supposed to be protected by law, tell me in the comments, because I want to know I'm not the only one who's lived through that. I hired an employment lawyer within the week, a careful, methodical man named Daniel Foss, no relation to my husband, who read through my original contract line by line. On the 4th page, buried in language nobody reads closely when they're excited to accept a new job, he found something Gregory himself had probably forgotten existed. "You were granted a small equity stake when you joined," Daniel said, sliding the contract across his desk. 0.5%. It's tiny, but it's real, and it comes with information rights. As a shareholder, even a small one, you're legally entitled to see the company's full financial records. 0.5% felt like nothing. It turned out to be exactly the foothold I needed. It took Daniel's team 9 days to confirm the equity grant was fully valid and enforceable, since Gregory's own legal team had never bothered updating the original template contracts after the company's early growth years. I didn't file a wrongful termination suit right away, though Daniel built the case quietly in the background. Instead, using my rights as a shareholder, I requested the company's full financial disclosures, and what I found inside them told a story Gregory had clearly hoped no one would ever piece together. Halstead Marketing Group was in far worse shape than any client or employee realized, carrying debt from an expansion 2 years earlier that had never paid off, with 3 board members quietly looking for a way out. I started meeting privately with a venture capital contact I'd known for years, a sharp, patient investor named Marcus Lynn, who'd always said he'd love to see Halstead run differently. Together, over the following months, we approached the distressed board members one at a time, offering to buy their shares at a price better than anything else on the table, while I kept working a quiet consulting job on the side, never once mentioning what I was building behind the scenes. Marcus told me once, near the end of it all, that he'd taken the meeting purely as a favor at first, back when it was just an idea over coffee, before he saw the actual numbers and realized the opportunity was as real as the grievance behind it. It was during one of those meetings that I learned something that made the whole plan feel less like revenge and more like justice. A board member named Helen Osei told me, almost as an aside, that Gregory had pushed out 2 other employees over the years using similar timing around medical leave, always just before their protections would have kicked in fully. I wasn't his first target. I was simply the first one who'd found a way to push back. Marcus and I spent long evenings across those months reviewing spreadsheets at my kitchen table after Mia went to sleep, mapping out exactly which board members were most likely to sell and at what price, careful never to move too quickly and risk word reaching Gregory before we were ready. By month 14, Marcus, Helen, and I, through a holding company neither Gregory nor his remaining allies ever traced back to me directly, controlled 52% of Halstead Marketing Group. I didn't confront Gregory yet. I let Daniel finalize the wrongful termination settlement quietly first, folding a modest payout into the larger transition so nothing would look connected until the exact moment I wanted it to. 18 months after that termination email, I walked into an emergency board meeting Gregory believed was about quarterly budget concerns. "Olivia," he said, standing halfway out of his chair when I walked in, "what are you doing here?" "Attending my board meeting," I said, sitting down at the head of the table. "As majority shareholder." His face went through several emotions in under 10 seconds, confusion first, then something closer to horror once Helen confirmed, out loud, in front of the room, exactly how the shares had changed hands. "Effective immediately," I said, echoing the same 4 words from his own email 18 months earlier. "Your position has been eliminated due to restructuring." The room stayed silent for a long moment before Marcus quietly slid the formal termination paperwork across the table. The rest happened quickly. Security escorted Gregory's personal belongings out of his office that same afternoon, and his executive access badge was deactivated before he'd even made it to the parking lot. His name came down from the door of the corner office by the end of the week. On my way out that final afternoon, I stopped by my old cubicle, the one I'd been moved to after losing my office during those first quiet months of the pregnancy, and found a colleague still working there, someone who'd watched the whole thing happen from a few desks away and never said a word out loud until now. I gathered the remaining staff 2 days later and told them plainly what had changed and why. I announced new parental leave protections stronger than anything required by law, a transparent promotion process open to every employee, and a company-wide commitment that no one would ever again lose their role for having a child. The same email Gregory used to strip me of my job, sent while I held my newborn daughter, ended up becoming the exact evidence and motivation that stripped him of an entire company instead. 6 months later, the corner office that once belonged to Gregory Hastings looks nothing like it used to. We converted it into an on-site nursery and lactation suite, the first of its kind at any agency in our city, complete with a small crib in the corner where Mia sometimes naps on the days I bring her in. Halstead Marketing Group has grown by nearly 30% since the leadership change, with client retention higher than it's been in company history, since it turns out people like working somewhere that doesn't punish them for building a family. Daniel Foss now consults part-time for a human resources team, helping build out the parental leave policy from the ground up, and Helen stayed on the board, calling the last year and a half the best decision she never expected to make. I heard Gregory took a smaller role at a competing agency across town, one that reportedly checked his employment history a little more carefully than they might have otherwise, once word of the lawsuit and the takeover made its way through the industry. The termination email arrived while I held my newborn daughter, 3 days after giving birth, telling me my 6 years didn't matter. It took 18 months to prove exactly how wrong that email was, standing in the same building, in the same boardroom, with my daughter's crib now sitting where his desk used to be. If you've ever had to quietly build your own comeback instead of accepting someone else's version of your worth, you already know it works better that way. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and tell me down below what you would have done the moment that email landed in your inbox.